everyone. I'm sorry for the delay. We had a technical difficulty. I'm Gönül Tol. I'm the director of the Middle East Institute's Turkey program. And today I'm pleased to welcome you to today's event to discuss the results of Kadir Has University's 2021 Turkey Trends Survey. A group of researchers led by Dr. Mustafa Aydin has been conducting the survey for almost 11 years now. And it measures Turkish public perceptions on current issues. And we thought that the Turkey Trends Survey is a very valuable resource to track the transformation in Turkish public perception of the country's political, economic and social issues. So we invited Dr. Mustafa Aydin to discuss the results with us. He is a professor of international relations at Kadir Has University, and he's also the survey coordinator. Dr. Aydin, many thanks for taking the time to be with us today. Before we get started, let me just a few housekeeping items. You can ask questions anytime during the event using the Q&A function on your screens, and I'll do my best to factor them into the discussion. And with that, let's begin. Dr. Aydin, many thanks for joining us, taking the time to be with us today. Sorry, you're muted. Can you unmute?
All right. Thanks for the invitation, Gönül. Sorry for the earlier mix-up. So we are here again.
Great. No problem. So first, please tell us about the survey itself before we start talking about its findings. What is the objective of the survey? How big is your sample? We'll begin with that.
Well, the survey itself is, this year was 11th year. So we have been doing this for a decade now. The basic aim is to follow the trends in Turkish public opinion on various issues, not only foreign policy, but we are trying to track the changes in Turkish domestic politics, the political views, the economic policies, the government policies, how the Turkish public are thinking about them, how their feelings are changing, and all, their general observations. How their trust on institutions, almost anything that you can imagine about Turkey, we are trying to track down and to at least gather some data. I think this is the only data available for the country that has been going on like last 10 years. And this year we have done this in on 6 November, 23rd of October to 6 November, the field study. So we have to say it from the beginning that this was done before the latest ups and downs in Turkish economy. That was the kind of first question the Turkish public kept asking, how this affected the results, but it didn't, which is good also.
So what is your most striking finding? Something that you did not expect to find?
Well, if you do something 10 consecutive years, there is not much that. Well, I mean, if I'm surprised by the results, it would mean either of two things. The one thing that we are not good of what we are doing, so that we couldn't predict, or the data is somehow flawed. So we are not really surprised much of the results, but what I'm being surprised every year is how people are surprised of these results. Every time that I come out of the public, in front of the public and explain the results of the survey, they always question the results. And depending on where they are standing and which political view they are taking, they always find it objectionable, that because we are shooting on every side, actually.
So what were they surprised about the most?
Well, usually, in general, public the people who are interested in this kind of surveys are usually intellectuals, academics, journalists, and these are the people that I get in touch first, then the Turkish public in general. But these, let's say, more intellectual, more educated classes of Turkish society usually have their own opinion about how Turkish politics is evolving. And our survey have always contradict that kind of objection or perception. The general perception in Turkey, whenever you talk to people, is that the government is losing votes tremendously, and it's weakening so fast. And now the elections are coming and the opposition is going to win. Some people even predict comfortably. And my survey is always more conservative in that sense. And what we have found also in this year is that, yes, the government parties and the coalition, in a sense, has been losing some of the support, but it has not as much as some people were expecting or predicting. So this is, kind of a general upset for some of the people, at least.
Well, I'll tell you in a minute. I found some things quite surprising. But before that, I want to ask, you have a cluster of questions designed to understand how people identify themselves, their political views. I mean, do they define themselves as an Islamist or a nationalist, leftist, liberal? So, and there's some striking findings there. So what did you find there? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, we have been following this, and of course there is something unique to Turkey. Some of the identities has to be unique to Turkey. I mean, the others, like conservative, nationalist, these are universal identities and you can test them. But there are other identities which exist in Turkey, like I'm gonna use Turkish word here, ulusalcı, which is a sort of a nationalist, but not traditional right-wing nationalist. So we had to come up with some new identities, in a sense, not global political science, the usually accepted identities. But in general, when we look at the Turkish politics, there are, let me say, the 5 biggest identities, political identities, I mean, are conservative, nationalist, Kemalist, political Islamist, and social democrat. And the play is, at least in last 10, 11 years, the play is between them. And one of the identities or group of identities that we are tracking is the combination of conservative and political Islamists, because these are the people who are mostly voting for the government Justice and Development Party.
When you say conservative, sorry, you mean religiously conservative, right?
Well,
so
that's debatable. That's debatable, because we also ask people about their religious view, how they feel themselves, how religious they are. And then we are not satisfied with only their response. We also ask some of the practical questions of what they do daily if they are religious, right?
I mean, I'm trying to understand whether that's what you are trying to measure. That's what you're trying to measure, right?
Well, it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, I know what it means, the American terms, but it doesn't exactly correspond into Turkey. Religion plays quite an important place in conservatism in Turkey, that's for sure. But conservatism is not only about religion. I mean, if you are looking traditional political scientist description of conservatism, you can find that in Turkey in the social democrats group also, because when you look at it, there are quite many people who call themselves conservatives and votes to CHP, the main opposition party, who thinks that it's social democrat. So it's not only about religion, but the question is designed specifically about how they would define themselves in their political views. So it could include religion, of course, their nationalism, their maybe economic views, especially also. But again, in Turkey, for example, liberal doesn't really get any response, right? I mean, in Europe and in
a curse. It's almost an insult.
well, I mean, yeah, there is no liberal position in political grouping. It gets like 2-3% because people don't define themselves liberals. But most of these conservatives who define themselves conservatives, we know economically they are liberal.
Okay.
But politically they are not.
Yeah,
so this question.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. So I saw an increase. You sent me some of the findings. I saw an increase in the number of those who define themselves as conservative, but a decrease compared to the previous year. But a decrease in the number of those who define themselves as an Islamist. So explain to us what those two things mean when put together.
Yeah, the put together is more important because, again, political Islam was a problematic definition in Turkey. Originally, we used, if I have to translate into English, it could be like devout, dindar in Turkish.
Yeah.
Try to capture, pious. Try to capture the people who feel religion has important role in politics, but we didn't originally use in this research the political Islamists because we thought the political Islamists in Turkish have some negative connotations and it might just drive people off. But 2 years ago, in 2019, we decided now it's the time, we have to go back, we have to conform with the real political science and call what it is. And we said, political Islamist. And then suddenly there was this drop from 27% to 9%. Immediately, if we change from pious to political Islamist, drop was very heavy. But these people, that confirmed that has some difficult connotations. These people moved to conservatives.
Okay.
Right? That's why there was this spike in conservatism in the last couple of years. But that's the reason why we follow the combination of conservative and political Islamists or pious together. And the result there is very interesting because it peaked in 2017. It was going up every year up until 2017, which was 47.4% in 2017.
You mean the people who identified themselves with conservatism peaked in 2017?
Conservatism plus political Islamists or pious. So the combination of this group, it peaked in 2017 and it started to decline from there. And now in 2021, it's 36%. So the decline is about 11 points.
So did I get this right? So this year you saw an increase in religiosity. Can we safely say that?
No. What we saw is people who previously defined themselves pious or religious, if you like, they moved to define themselves more conservative. But if we follow the two together, it's declining over the years since 2017.
Oh, okay. So this could be, remember, there was a report prepared by a local branch of Turkey's Ministry of Education. And the report found that even in state-sponsored religious schools, whose enrollment levels have skyrocketed since in the Erdogan era, thanks to the government incentives, an alarming number of students are losing faith in Islam. That was the finding of the report. So does your survey's finding support that?
Actually, we try. There is, I know, in the especially in the more religiously oriented circles, we hear that there are so many people who are becoming deist or atheist, and we wanted to test this, and we asked about this. For example, we asked how would they define themselves from religious perspective, apart from politics. But we don't find too much peak who define themselves as deist or atheist. In our survey, for example, it's only 1.1% who define themselves as deist. But there is another very interesting point. Most of the people, when we ask them how religiously, how they put themselves in a PT spectrum, about 90% of the population says that they are religiously very religious or religious.
Okay.
Right? But we ask them about their frequency observing the namaz prayer. Right? Namaz is one of the 5 most important
pillars.
One of the pillars of the Islam. That's what you have to do if you are really good believer. But 41% of the population says that they don't perform at all.
Okay.
That's very interesting. And only 21% say that they perform namaz 5 times a day.
Okay, so there's a question from the audience that there's a general question about the survey methodology and how has it been conducted via phone or face-to-face, and how many people did you ask?
Okay, yeah, this is conducted face-to-face. This has always been face-to-face. We never done by phone, except 2020 because of COVID. But even in that case, we went to houses. But if people didn't want to talk face-to-face, we use computers like Zoom programs. So it's always been face-to-face. 1,000 people across Turkey, 26 cities are chosen according to the NUTS regions in Turkey, the European NUTS regions. And the survey is conducted in city centers. So maybe there is this weakness that I do accept. We don't go to the rural areas, the villages and etc. But about 75% of Turkish population lives in the city centers. And if you take the city as a greater cities, it's 85%. So in that sense, that's not a big problem.
So going back to the finding about Islamism, you are saying that there's been a drop in the number of people who identify themselves as political Islamists. You know, there's been a debate on whether Islamists are ruining Islam or not. I mean, in other words, when those who champion Islam are in power, religion is associated with authoritarianism, corruption, and that leads to flight from Islam. So what's happening in the Turkish context?
Well, I mean, our survey cannot give an answer to that. But when I look at the Turkish public in general, much like anything else, it's 50-50. You know, half of the population is still more or less is supporting more conservative, more religious positions of the government, and the half of the population is opposing to that in general. I'm talking very general here. Of course, when we go into the detail, we look at the real numbers. So I'm not so sure. I followed what happened in Iran after the revolution. That's not exactly the same thing is not happening in Turkey in that sense. But again, I also hear from the Islamist circles that they keep talking about this loss of faith. And I'm not sure whether they are seeing as something real or something ghost or something that they are afraid, really. Maybe they are feeling that Turkey should have been much more religious and it's not religious enough for them. And they keep talking about this. But in our survey, we didn't find many people who are kind of falling out of religion. I think Turkish society was always like this. When you ask them, they say that they are religious. But when you question them about their practices in religion, they don't do performance.
Sure, but it's socially acceptable to there's social pressure to say that you're religious. There was one question from the audience who asked whether refugees have been represented in the survey.
No. If they are not Turkish citizens, they are not represented. In that sense, we don't ask them questions. But the refugees appear in number of questions, of course, in the survey.
What about nationalism? We talked about conservatism, Islamism. What about nationalism? We know that it's a strong current that cuts across party lines. And compared to previous years, is there an increase or a decrease in the number of people who define themselves as national?
In the last 4 or 5 years, it has been stabilized. If you look at in early 2000s, it was like maybe 12%. In 2010s, it has increased about 15%, and now it's more or less 19 to 20%. In last 4 or 5 years, we have been finding this between 19 to 22%. So it's not really changing. So it is kind of stabilized as a political view. However, if you look at it in the general population, and if you ask them how much nationalists they are, or they think they are, then 80% of Turkish or actually even 90%, sorry, 90% of the Turkish population says that they are either very nationalist or nationalist. So this is just like religion. If you ask them whether they are nationalists, they will say that they are nationalists. But if you force them to choose political view, nationalism is about 20%.
I think I saw a slight decrease compared to the previous year. And
yes, last year.
I was surprised because I would expect the opposite, given the concern over the presence of millions of Syrian refugees is increasing in the country. So wouldn't that cause a spike in Turkish nationalism? So how do you explain the decrease?
I mean, it's just very minor decrease, just 2%, and it's within the margins of mistake of the statistical mistake. So it's not that important. And also, as I said, we also include some identities very specific to Turkey, like ulusalcı or ülkücü, which are also variations of nationalism.
Let's explain those terms for those who are not familiar.
Okay.
I call ulusalcı left-wing nationalism. Some call it neo-nationalism. And I guess ülkücü, it's safe to call them Turkish nationalists. It's
Turanist nationalist, pan-Turanist, right?
Yeah, there are certainly nuances. So please continue. You found an increase in the number of people.
So if you include all this, of course, if you put all these groups together, then the number is like about 30%, right? So if you think nationalist is only on the right, then there is nothing changed. But if you include this left-wing nationalist also, which can be presented in the Social Democratic Party as well, or even other parties on the left, then it's kind of very widespread. The Turkish people, society in general, it's nationalist. There is no doubt of it. Majority of it's nationalist. But as a political view, the ones who would vote for the Nationalist Party would be about 20%. Or actually, it's less than 20%. The party gets only 10%. The other 10% goes to other right-wing parties, mostly now Justice and Development Party.
Do you remember the year when nationalism spiked in Turkey, peaked? I would expect the developments in Syria had a huge impact, and I would actually say maybe 2014 or 2015, because in 2014 the United States decided to airdrop weapons to the PKK's Syrian branch. and that caused a huge nationalist backlash in Turkey. And in 2015, again, there was, again, basically the US PYD cooperation must have caused a spike. Was that the case?
That depends on how you look at it. If you are asking the question about political nationalism, it didn't spike then. It's always remained in the 10, 11, 12% margin. But if you are asking about the Turkish people in general, that's correct. Because, as I said, nationalism in Turkey, it's beyond the party politics. They are in every party, in the left-wing parties, even among the socialists. There are people who considers themselves as nationalists. Okay. If you ask them directly the question how nationalist they are, look at the figure. The only 2% of the population says that they are not nationalist at all. Only 2%. And only 8% of the population said that they are not much nationalist. The rest, they think that they are nationalist in general.
Well, there's a question about this, and that was going to be my next question. Last year, I found something striking. The number of people who flocked to the tomb of Ataturk, who is the country's founder, to commemorate his death was dramatically higher than previous years. And my explanation was that as Erdogan doubles down on his project to construct a Sunni Muslim nation, or as he intensifies his attacks on the symbols of secularism, people react, and they register their reaction by re-embracing the country's secularist founder. So what do you think? What does your survey say about that support for Kemalism or secular values?
You are correct. Of course, as you know, and many people who are listening this also would know, in the old Turkey, within the quotation marks, the being pro-Ataturk or the party of Ataturk, I wouldn't call them Kemalists. Again, there is this cleavage in Turkish politics being Kemalist or Atatürkçü, pro-Ataturk, which is different. In the old Turkey, before AKP rise to power, the Mustafa Kemal Atatürk was celebrated by the state, and it was associated with the state, and you wouldn't have seen so many people in the Anıtkabir, the mausoleum of the Mustafa Kemal. But since in last few years is increasingly more, but it's not new. In last 10 years, the official celebration has kind of dumped down. Many people individually and privately started to going to the mausoleum, and that number has been increasing every year. And part of it is, of course, political reaction. One way of showing their reaction to the government policies. The other part of it is just identify themselves with the reforms and the secular country that Mustafa Kemal established. There is one interesting, it's just like a differentiation between political Islamist and a pious. We used to ask about people whether they are Atatürkçü, right? Pro-Ataturk. And again, the numbers were so high, we suspected that this cannot be correct in political sense. And we look into the behind it, and the people who are even political Islamists who would say that they are Atatürkçü, pro-Ataturk, right? So he is a kind of a unifying character going beyond the political figures. So the Kemalist in Turkey normally is about 10 to 12%, it's like a Bonapartism. So Kemalism in Turkey gets the following of about 10 to 12%. However, this year, as again you rightly pointed, there was a spike here. Suddenly it jumped to 20%, which is very interesting. It never happened before. So we have to follow this trend, whether it will continue next year or not.
And just to clarify for our viewers, that 20% Kemalists, do they all vote for the main opposition, CHP, that was founded by Ataturk?
We have to see because there hasn't been election yet, but not really. It's very interesting when we look at the people who vote for different parties. Let's take CHP now. When you see, let's assume that CHP's vote is about 25%. Let's say that, right? Just assume. In those 25%, they will get every type of people. They will get about maybe 30% of the Kemalists, 20% of the conservatives, 20% of the nationalists. So this is kind of very unique in Turkey. This happens to all the parties. So, for example, even in the people who vote for the Justice and Democracy Party, you would find Kemalists who define themselves as Kemalists as well. Not as much as those who vote for CHP, but nevertheless, they will be there.
Okay,
so no, I wouldn't say that all Kemalists would vote CHP.
Okay, so one question. Dr. Aydin said that the government is losing support, but not as much as the opposition and some media things. So I would like to know, what are the main reasons for people to still support the government despite the difficult economic situation?
First of all, as I said at the beginning, this field research for this survey was done just before the latest spike in or downturn of the economic crisis. This turning the latest exchange rate crisis and the inflation. So that's not reflected in this survey. However, there are a number of issues. One, there is this tendency among those people who have voted to the government party before, they still tend to believe that it's the Erdogan and this government who can take them out of this crisis. Because their argument usually is that in 2001, we had a huge economic crisis. It was the AKP who took us out of this crisis and, took the country into the level of 13,000 US dollar per capita. Okay, they made maybe some mistakes, and many of these people also do believe the government's rhetoric that it's not the government's mistakes, but it's the international conspiracies, whatnot. But nevertheless, this crisis happened, and again, they could rescue us. This is one part of it, and especially among the voters of the government party. For the others, the main problem is about the policies of the opposition parties. There is not one unified position of the opposition parties. There are quite many different of them, and they are not as clear as the government's policies. You see, people know what the government is capable and what they have done and what they could do or not do. But we don't know exactly what the opposition party is promising. That's a weakness, obviously. And I think that's quite affects the positions.
So economic concerns top voters' agenda, right? So if you break this down to party affiliations, do you find economic concerns and concerns over the refugees? And by the way, concerns over the refugees comes right after economic concerns, which is quite high. And I think it was 2019 was a turning point, because before 2019, I've never seen a public opinion survey that listed voter concern over refugees that high. So, and that could explain why the AKP lost almost all major cities in Turkish elections. So going back to my question, do these concerns, the economic concerns and concerns over refugees, are they as strong among Erdogan supporters?
Yes. I mean, if you look at across the party spectrum, there are more or less same, not much difference. You know, when you ask people about the most important problem in Turkey, there is not much difference between the parties or party voters. But when you ask them about the reasons of these problems,
they don't blame Erdogan.
Then it changes. Yeah, they don't blame Erdogan, or they don't blame the government. Comes the other explanations.
Okay, so what do survey results say about Erdogan's standing? I mean, how popular? Still quite popular, isn't it? Isn't he?
Yes, there are a number of different types of questions, and we try to judge it from various perspectives. One is we ask directly about the support, you know, whether they support President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, which is different as the party leader Erdogan. So currently his support is 40% overall. This, of course, goes as high as 80% within the AKP voters. It goes down like 3% within the HDP voters. But on average in the country is 40%. And this is the same in last year. There is no change from the last year. However, the negative side is increasing also. Those who are saying that they do not definitely support Erdogan has been increasing. Last year it was 32%. This year is 37%. So those who are in the middle, who didn't have an opinion or who was not sure, are moving against the opposition. But nevertheless, as I said, those who say they would support Erdogan, President Erdogan, it's 40%. But of course, we have other questions, you know, like asking how successful they find Erdogan as president or as party leader. And these are different. For example, in general, the performance of President Erdogan is found again, it's a very slight decrease from last year, like 1% decrease, and it's 39%. So it's more or less same with the support. However, his own party, is very strongly behind him, because it's within the party, his support is 92%, which is highest ever we have recorded. And it's interesting this year because it's not only the AKP, but in all other parties as well. The leaders of the parties, their support have increased this year, and it's not a small increase. Usually, it's a spike. And I attribute this to the feeling that the country is moving towards the elections.
Yes.
So people are going behind their own party leaders. Yes.
What about support? There are a couple questions about foreign policy, and I'll get to that in a minute. I have several questions about that. But what about support for the presidential system? And I think this is very important because the opposition is running on a platform to switch back to a reformed parliamentary system. That's kind of their only thing that unite them together, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Super divided along ideological lines. You have Kurdish nationalists, you have Turkish nationalists, you have social democrats, you have liberals, all kinds of different ideological groups. But yet they came together on this common platform that is against presidentialism. So if as the opposition bloc, if you build your entire strategy on that, you must be assuming that that's the main concern of the people, right? But I see in your findings, I don't know if I'm mistaken, but support for the presidential system is not that weak. Am I right?
You are right, and this was one of the most debated aspect of the survey this year in Turkey. We forced respondents to choose sides. We gave them only two options, and we didn't give them, you know, I don't know or I'm not sure kind of options. So we forced them as if it's in the referendum to choose between what we call in Turkey presidential government system or the parliamentary system. So the support came 55.7% for the presidential government system. Of course, this is very upsetting for the opposition. As you said, they are putting their platform on it. But when we look at the behind why this came about like this, we found out that 25% of CHP voters, the main opposition party, supports the presidential system, or 26%.
Sorry,
25%.
That's high.
But very high. And 26% for the E party, the second biggest opposition party.
Nationalist party.
Yeah. So obviously the government coalition, AK Party and MHP, they support the presidential system. There is no doubt there. But the biggest surprise was CHP and E party's positions.
But how do you explain that? Even when right after during the referendum, remember, it was a knife edge margin. The margin was there was even a debate.
Yeah, it was only 2%. Yeah,
it was only 2%. So even then, presidentialism was not backed by a large segment of society to begin with. And how many years since 2017? And we have so many problems, and yet it seems like support for presidentialism is increasing. That's really that's shocking.
I mean, we have been asking these questions since 2013. And when we started the first year, I remember it was like 23%. The support for presidential system was 23%, and 70+% parliamentary system. And from there, it has increased over the years. And last 2 years, actually, it has not changed. It's 55% in last 2 years. My explanation is, first of all, as people are talk about this issue, as it's being talked in the public, and as they see how it's applied in practice, their support is increased. Obviously, the government parties or governing coalition is doing much better job of explaining what it is than the opposition parties who are try to explain the parliamentary system, the benefits of parliamentary system. Secondly, as we have, everybody who have followed Turkish politics knows, there is this cult of leadership in Turkish politics. I mean, almost all parties run on leaders. And Turkish leaders are always important in Turkish politics.
Sure.
And in number of different questions, we keep finding the support for one leader or one leaderless, one leader management is always been about 50%, more than 50%. So this is not in that sense surprising. But people keep surprised when hear about this, because they think that the opposition parties have been explaining, and they should at least have convinced their own voters. But this year's figures shows that they have not yet convinced their own voters as well.
So there are two questions about the Kurds. One, Hakan asked a question. Hakan, you have to be more specific. And the second question is, I guess I'm not sure whether your study had a finding about this, but I guess about Kurds' voting behavior, whether they will vote for the HDP or AKP. I'm just assuming. I think the question is not that clear. But so, do you have any data on that?
Well, I mean, we all know they are divided. Most of the HDP voters, of course, are Kurds, but not all of them, but most of them are Kurds. But this doesn't mean that all Kurds are voting for HDP. So considering that HDP is getting like 11% of the vote.
It's the Kurdish party. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Pro-Kurdish party. So considering that they are getting 11%, and again, considering that the Kurds in Turkey would be between 15 to 20% of the population, that means the rest of the Kurds are voting different parties. From many other... Sorry?
Or staying home.
Maybe no, they don't stay home. they don't stay home because the voting average of the Kurds among the Kurds are quite high. It's above the average of Turkish population in general.
Traditionally, it's the most politicized community.
Exactly.
But I think after what's happened in the last few elections, there were many irregularities, especially in the Kurdish region. Maybe they lost faith in the democratic process.
Look, most of the Kurds live in Istanbul, not in the southeast Turkey. And in the last the local elections, they came out very strongly and voted. We have observed that. So no, I would say that they are voting quite heavily. But there is this kind of general division between more conservative Islamist Kurds who vote en masse to government party, and more nationalist and educated Kurds who actually live in bigger cities who vote for HDP. One result in this survey, we also ask about whether they think that HDP represent the Kurdish people. And this has been declining in recent years, not only in the general population, which is okay, for obvious reason, it's not very illuminating, but among the Kurdish origin people, when you look at only the Kurds, even they are thinking that the HDP is not representing the Kurdish population in Turkey. At least it's decreasing in recent years. And I think that's more, one more figure, sorry about this. When we ask about the party voters, whether they are satisfied with their leaders in the party, HDP gets HDP gets the list, list of the list support among the parties. So it's like 55%, if I'm not mistaken. So the HDP voters are not very happy with the leadership of the party. Of course, this has to do very much about the confusion of the leadership of the party. The real leader of the party is being in prison. The others are not seen effective enough, or they are not seen as the leaders enough, even from the voters of the party.
Let's talk about people's views about foreign policy. Since Erdogan allied himself with the nationalists in 2015, 2016, he's been, well, not anymore, but he pursued a militaristic, anti-Western, very unilateral, aggressive foreign policy, right? So what do people think about that? Are they okay with a Turkey that is quite isolated on the international stage?
No. When you ask Turkish people, no. The support, evaluation of government's foreign policy, we have always found around between 30 to 35%. But it has started to increase from 2019 onwards. So it has now, this year, it's 50%. So as the government has changed its policy of international involvements, let me put it that way, the support started to increase, and the main support is coming from the opposition voters, actually. Because generally Turkish population do not really favor Turkey to be so much active in international theaters. When there are operations, for example, abroad in Syria or anywhere else, obviously there is this rally around the flag effect. It happens. When the operation happens, support increases. But after 3 or 4 months, it suddenly decreases. And if there is no operation in that year, and if you ask that question, generally Turkish public do not want Turkey to get involved in Middle Eastern affairs or Syria or Iraq or anything else.
What about not long ago, a majority of respondents said the US was the biggest foreign threat to Turkey. Has that changed this year?
Well, this year it's Armenia, for obvious reasons, because of the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh. But there is another difference regarding the United States. in last 3 years, it has started to be perceived as less of a threat than traditionally it was. It's still number 3 this year after Armenia and Israel, but the number has decreased from 65% to 55% in last 2 years. So it's a major improvement in that sense.
What about views about Russia? What do they think? Do they see Russia as a strategic ally, as a threat?
It fluctuates depending on what happened in the year. After 2015, when there was when Turkey shut down the Russian airplane on the Syrian border, Russia suddenly increased as a threat, but then it's gradually get better. Now this year it's 44%, which is increased again from 40% last year. The increase is because of the Caucasus, because it's there as well, and it's seen as supporting Armenia. So it fluctuates depending on the relationship between Turkey and Russia. But it's not a strategic ally as far as the Turkish population is concerned.
Is there a question in the survey about Greece?
Several, actually, several. Greece is, of course, one of the countries that are not seen as a friend. It's one of the countries who are seen as a threat. But we have other questions like about Cyprus issue, about how to solve the problems in the Aegean, and etc. The Cyprus issue has been changing the view. I'm trying to remember the exact figures, but overall, I can say that the support for preference for the solution of the Cyprus problem by establishing 2 states, as the government is currently proposing, or uniting the northern Cyprus with Turkey, has been increasing in last 5 years. But nevertheless, when you ask directly how to solve between problems between Greece and Turkey, the military solution is not favored. The diplomatic solution is always gets higher support among the public.
What about support for EU membership among Turkish public? Is that high?
Considering it's quite high, actually, considering everything that's happening and all the rhetoric in the country, this year we found it's 58%, which is the 3rd highest figure that we have found since we started this survey. It peaked in 2014, 71%, when there was a discussion of possibility of visa liberalization. There was this 2014, when Ahmet Davutoğlu was the prime minister. There was this talks with the visa liberalization, etc. The support is peaked, but then it started to decline. But again, it's recovered. It's never less than 50% in our survey, and it's usually the exact figure depends on how Turkey is being, how the international relations of Turkey is usually developing. When we have more problems around Turkey, more conflicts, and etc., population support for NATO and EU increases.
Yes.
When everything seems okay, the support a little bit decreases, but it's never less than 50%.
So maybe this could answer my next question. What do people think about Erdogan's Syria policy? I mean, particularly the military incursions. Is there appetite in Turkey for another military incursion into Syria?
Turkey's Syria policy never gets more than 30% in our survey. The population in general, even those who are voting for the AKP, have found the Syria policy at fault, let's say. And the preferred policy is very clear: stay out of it. And we give number of options, and stay out of it always gets the highest support. Regarding the military operations, As I said, when there is an operation, the support builds up immediately and suddenly as the operation continues. But this year, there was no operation. So the support for cross-border military operation is 33%. This is decline from 56% 2017 when there was number of incursions into Syria. So it depends on when there is an deployment of soldiers. It seemed patriotic to support them.
Sure.
But however, when there is no deployment, the support is quite low.
That could change too, because the opposition made a strategic move. The CHP, the Secularist main opposition party, they did not support the parliamentary motion to send troops across the border. So that was the first. Until now, the opposition backed whatever Erdogan was doing in Syria, particularly the military incursions. So that was the first, and maybe that will sway public opinion as well moving forward. So I have two more questions. One is, you have a group of questions designed to understand people's threat perception, and you have in there terrorist groups such as ISIS, you have PKK, but you also included minorities, organized crime, and refugees. So what are your findings there when you ask people what they are afraid of? What comes on top?
Well, I mean, this is the first time that we have formulated this question in this way, and we try to put every kind of fears that you can find in the public and discussions here, whether they seen them as a threat. And this is, in a sense, surprised me, because first three is ISIS, FETÖ, which is Fethullah Gülen terror organization in Turkish, and Al-Qaeda. So these three religiously affiliated organizations and terror organizations in Turkish perspective have been found even more threatening than PKK, which is the definition of terrorism in Turkey, or has been the definition of terrorism in Turkey. So that was very interesting for me. And also maybe, although some student protest, because if you are as old as I am, who has lived in 1980s in Turkey, and how the student protest or workers' strikes are kind of, made as a bogeyman. This is an interesting finding. People do not find them as a threat in Turkey, which is good, obviously, which is very good.
Well,
refugees is in the middle. I mean, that's not then seen as threatening that much.
Very quickly, because we're running out of time, two questions on foreign policy again. One from Ellen Makovsky, who asks, any idea why Israel consistently ranks as one of the top threats to Turkey? What's the nature of the perceived threat? I mean, obviously it's unpopular, but perceiving as a threat is something quite different. And the other question about foreign policy is, what is Turkish public view on Turkey's relations with Saudi and UAE and Qatar?
Okay, Ellen, it's obviously Palestine issue. When we ask, when we ask the question of threats, the response is generally related to Turkey's international relations and how people how they relate to Turkey's international relations and relate to history. It's not exactly correspond to threat perception. For example, we put as a test, we put Myanmar there, whether they feel a threat from Myanmar. But obviously there is a threat from Myanmar in the public perception because of the Muslims, suppression of some of the Muslims, Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, or India. I mean, there is no threatening connection between Turkey and India, but India appears in the list as a threat because of the Kashmir issue. So Israel is always been there, and it always will be there because of the specific issue of the Palestine. However, of course, it has peaked in recent years since 2010 with the Mavi Marmara and all the other problems, and with the worsening of the relations, diplomatic relations between Turkey and Israel. And it's always been there. So that these are the explanations. Regarding these countries, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, and I would include Egypt also, these were traditionally not seen as threats, obviously. But in recent years, as the government's rhetoric has picked up of their conspiracies and cooperating with Turkey's enemies and etc., this has affected Turkish public opinion, and they have started rise on the list of the threats. However, this year, with the government's change of policy, kind of a reconciliation with everybody policy, this threat perceptions with all these three countries also declined. And the support for reconciliation has increased somewhat, let me say. Not tremendously, but a little bit.
Okay, one question. I'm sorry, I'm trying my best to squeeze in everything. There's a question about the refugees. Is there a difference in host communities' perceptions of refugees depending on their location? Are they seen as more of an issue in border cities? Yeah, I would say no, because very small number of them now live on the camps, and mostly they live in the western parts of the country, right? Am I right?
Exactly. But yeah, they are seen as a problem uniformly. I mean, it's so high. Seeing refugees as problems is quite high. It's everywhere. But it's if I have to kind of classify, east and southeast of Turkey is higher than the other regions, but not too much.
There's been a decline in trust in mainstream media in the last years. You conducted the survey. Social media usage seems to have increased considerably. Do you think digital media is rising as an alternative source to mainstream media over the years?
It is. Yeah. I mean, when we ask about newspaper readings and etc., at 72% of the populations, 72% of those who say that they read newspaper, which is not very high anyway, but the 72% reads it from internet. So the traditional media, printed media, is not anymore really followed. But the percentage of people who are following the media anyway is already declining quite a lot as well.
And my last question, are people happy to be living in Turkey?
They are.
They are?
They are. Oh, yes. And it's interesting. This year, there is a kind of shift. Those who used to say that they are very happy to live in Turkey moved to the category of happy, from very happy to happy. So there is a decrease there. But those who are saying that they are, neither happy nor unhappy, also move to be happy. The reason is number of explanations. One is the voters for the government parties. I would include MHP also here. They are increasingly happy to live in Turkey for various obvious and various reasons. But the others, some of the people this answer doesn't come from this research, but another research that friend of mine conducted in a district in Istanbul. Gönül, you would know this, Balcılar, which is one of the outskirts of Istanbul, where people are quite poor if you compare with the Turkish population, less educated, less cultures, and etc. And when they asked the question about this, number of people said it was quite high, like 75% of the people were happy to live there. And they were puzzled. So they conducted a focus group study there, why this is the case. And the result is that many people are thinking that they cannot live anywhere else comfortably because nobody would accept them, or they cannot fit in any other district in Istanbul or in Turkey. So there is this kind of a feeling. I think part of the explanation that they are happy to live in Turkey because
they don't have an alternative.
Some of them feel that they don't have an alternative. If they can go to abroad, they don't fit to the abroad. And incidentally, this also is the case because we are asking whether they prefer to live abroad. And there is a sharp decline this year. Last year, it was 21% who said that, or 21.5% who said they prefer to live abroad. This year, this is decreased to 10%. And I think the part of the explanation is that decline in the living standards because they see that they cannot afford to live abroad anyway.
That's interesting. I've seen other studies who suggested otherwise, but this has been a fascinating conversation, Dr. Aydin. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry to those whose questions I couldn't pose. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thanks again for joining and listening to us, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Gönül, for inviting me also.